我公司于83年8月10日起接手调查黑炮事件，现已查清，兹将经过汇报于后。
So the Black Cannon incident, 黑炮事件, was made in 1985, about 2 years after Wu Tianming became the head of Xi'an Film Studio. And it's very much a product of his policy as studio head to produce certain types of film. Now, maybe it's hard for people to remember this because it is quite a long time ago now, but in the 1980s, China still had a state film industry with 16 studios scattered across the country, some big ones, some very small ones. And each studio was assigned a quota of films, a number of films that they were supposed to produce in each year. And Xi'an was given maybe 12. I don't remember exactly, but it was something like 12 films a year they were expected to produce. And Wu Tianming he told me this at some length a couple of years after Black Cannon was made. Let's say 12 is the right figure. About half of those, in other words 6 of them, should be mainstream commercial films, appealing to a large mainstream audience, which should potentially make money for the studio. If they're well made and they're well chosen, the subjects prove popular, then they will attract a significant audience across China. They will sell lots and lots of prints of the film for the distribution system, and the studio will make money from them. The other half, though, he believed should be different, because he believed the studio had a duty, a kind of moral duty or an aesthetic duty to create more innovative films. He said it's also part of our job to push Chinese cinema forward. We need to be making innovative films. We need to be making films not like films have been before in China. So he called them Tansuopian, which I guess you'd translate as experimental films, but it's not experimental in the Western sense. It's experimental in the sense that these are untried formulas. These are different kinds of story told in a different way. Now, Huang Jianxin was a child of the studio in some sense. I think he was born in 54, I believe in Xi'an. I think he's from that part of China anyway. And so he'd come up through the film studio. He'd been working in the studio, doing various jobs. And he was selected by a studio vote, actually, a vote of studio workers, to be a representative of the studio to go off for a 2-year course at the Beijing Film Academy. I think the Beijing Film Academy still does it, but the basic entry requirements and student requirements at the Beijing Film Academy are a 4-year course, whichever department you join. But they have a special course, and I think they still have it, which lasts only 2 years, which is for people who are already working in film but don't have a Beijing Film Academy degree. So they can come and do an intensive 2-year course. And those people are not chosen by the Film Academy, but are nominated by the film industry. And in those days, since it was still a state film industry, that was relatively easy to organize. And so Huang Jianxin was a relatively young man at this point. He's just turned 30. Or is about to turn 30 in fact, when he is nominated by the studio to be one of the people going to Beijing for this 2-year course. And he has an interesting time in Beijing. In his last film, his kind of graduation project, he's allowed to make a 35mm short film, fiction with actors, which was actually banned from release in China. It sometimes happened that students at the Film Academy did make graduation shorts that had at least limited screenings in cinemas in China, because they were sort of good enough and it was an encouragement to the people who made them. Huang Jianxin's film was vetoed by the Film Bureau because they thought it presented a rather negative picture of student life, and therefore should not be seen widely because it would be discouraging to people. It seems a very ridiculous thing if you actually look at the film. The film is not at all discouraging about student life, but it does present. It's about a student crush. It's about a young woman who lacks self-confidence and who has an unvoiced crush on a very popular male student in her college. And it's about the difficulties that she has. It's a film totally from a woman's point of view, which is something that Hong Jian-qin didn't really do in later films. Nearly everything he made after that, from Black Cannon incident onwards, was basically about a man. So he tended to go for male protagonists. Anyhow, he was confronted by censorship pretty much from his very first fiction film. So he was quite used to being edgy, being difficult, challenging the film bureau, seeing how far they would go, how frank he could be. And in this, I have to say, he was completely encouraged by Wu Tianming, who also believed that it was part of their job to shake things up a bit. He wanted to make, if films that the studio produced were going to be controversial, he was very comfortable with that. He thought that that's also one of the things they should be doing. Testing the boundaries, not only aesthetically, but also politically. You know, if there are difficult questions out there in society, let's tackle them in the films. Let's not ignore them. Let's not pretend they don't exist. Let's not pretend let's not present rosy view of Chinese society. Let's make films that confront the problems and try to identify how they come up and what makes them happen. So Black Cannon came out of that combination of things, about the fact that Hong Jian-qin, having completed his 2-year course, experienced censorship for the first time, having a film banned in a small way, going back to Xi'an, finding Wu Tianming ever more confident about making challenging and innovative films in the studio context. And that combination of things, coupled with the discovery of a short story by Jiang Xianliang, which is the basis of the film. Jiang Xianliang, of course, was also a fairly controversial writer at the time. He also pushed into, let's say, difficult themes, for the Writers' Association often had trouble with his work. Although he was highly praised by some, he was vilified by others, partly for political reasons, it must be said. So that's another factor here. It's another controversial element in the film. If you choose to adapt a story by Jiang Xianliang, you're in a way serving notice that you intend to be a bit challenging. You're going to do something a bit out of the ordinary, something not comfortable necessarily. As it turns out, I think there was already a script based on Jiang's story when Hong Jian-qin came back to Xi'an. He read it, liked some basic ideas in the film, but didn't like the script very much. So he went to Jiang Xianliang himself and said, I'd like to rewrite this, I'd like to change various things. And reportedly, Jiang Xianliang said, fine, do it. I mean, tell me what you're doing, but in principle, I'm not against this at all. So the script is partly by Hong Jian-qin himself, I think, and it does, I haven't read the story, so I can't discuss in any detail how the film differs from the story, but the story, I think, has not been translated, and I don't really have access to it in Chinese. So I can't talk about that, but I can say that Hong Jian-qin very consciously designed the film to ask what I think he felt, and I'm sure Wu Tianming also felt this, were very urgent questions about the way Chinese society was being run in 1985, when the film was made.
大家看，这事儿该怎么办？
I think the film very consciously sets out to develop an aesthetic that is, I think, without precedent in Chinese cinema. I don't think anybody tried to do this before. Hong Jian-qin's first radical decision was to, as much as possible, eliminate blue and green from his colour spectrum. So the film is principally shot, although the film is of course made in colour, the film is basically in black and white. Black and white are there all the time. And shot through with reds. Reds are normally the colour of warning, and most of the reds that appear in the film are warning signs in some sense or other. And rather sickly yellows, which usually indicate that something is wrong. So the appearances of reds, yellows, and of course oranges, which are between the two. The famous WD equipment, which is being bought from Germany, is orange coloured, so it's exactly between red and yellow. These are the dominant colours in the film, and it is very extraordinary to see a film which has such a deliberately restricted colour palette. I'm not aware of any film in China which tried to do this before. I think it was a daring decision. It meant that Hong Jianxin, as he said at the time, had to work rather closely with his cinematographer and his art director, because this was a collective decision to go for this look in the film, and it posed all kinds of challenges for both the designer and the cinematographer, who had to basically attempt to eliminate or at least minimize the appearances of any greens and blues in the image. There are occasional glimpses of foliage in the backgrounds of some shots which are sort of greenish, but that's it really. And one image after another in the film is a very emblematic black and white with elements of red. So, for example, when the famous black cannon is finally seen, it finally comes out of its box towards the end of the film, there is a completely emblematic shot of the desktop in which it sits. The black cannon itself is by definition black and white. The box is a kind of anonymous brown colour, I guess, but you don't really take that in, you don't register it as a colour. It's on a red tabletop and there's a bright white telephone. So all of the colours are there. The main colours of the film are present in that shot. So you have that attempted restriction in the colour palette of the film, I think, is an absolute key to the aesthetic of the film. He wants the film to be stylised in certain ways, and he wants you to notice it. He wants it to be, it's kind of aggressive in that way. So that aggression, I think aggression is not too strong a word, is echoed in, for example, the emphasis on clocks. So every time there's a party meeting within the factory that has commissioned this German engineering equipment, it takes place under a giant clock on the back wall, which is of course black and white. Everybody is wearing white shirts, the room is white, so it's essentially a black and white room. And there's this enormous domineering clock in the background ticking away, dominating the image, I mean almost spanning the width of the image, and stressing, like all the other shots of clocks in the film, and there are quite a few, that time is money, time is costing money. All these stupid discussions, these round and round in circles discussions, particularly the clashes between the party secretary, the woman, and the works manager, Mr. Lee, who is rather pragmatic, are costing a lot of money, as are the issues that they're discussing. So I think time is money is a sort of background concern of the film. What I was talking about before was the aggression and the art direction, which gives us that enormous clock at one end of the room, filling the entire wall at the end of the room. It's another example of that kind of aggression. It's a very in-your-face kind of strong image that doesn't want you to miss anything. It wants you to, hits you with the full impact of the design and the thinking behind the design. Now the whole film is kind of like that. I think the film is in a way we can say the film is didactic. The film spells out a lesson. It does so in very clear terms. I mean, if you analyse the script, you can see each scene is there to make a very specific point, a very clear element in an ongoing analysis of how a problem arises. But it's disguised, the didacticism of the film, the explicitness, if you like, of the argument that underpins the film, is disguised very skillfully because the film throws you off the scent. And it does it in a very simple way. This is a film made in 1985, as we said, and it chooses to imagine that it's 2005, like 20 years later. Because the China that the film shows is not exactly the China of 1985. Anybody who was there in 1985 knows this is not exactly how things worked. This is a slightly fantasized, modernized China, where things are broadly speaking efficient, where things are broadly speaking modern, where the engagement with modern technology, modern science, modern social practices is pretty strong. And the only thing that hasn't changed is the politics. Politics is the same as it was in 1985. And that's already a satirically provocative vision that underpins the film. And I would argue that's what helps the film not seem didactic, because you're kind of taken aback by that approach, this rather brilliant, simple but brilliant idea of erasing many of the social problems in China, presenting a modern China, a China that is in fact something like 20 years ahead of the era in which it's actually shot, but keeping politics exactly where it was in 1985, and the kind of political discussions, political problems where they were in 1985. The film is successfully disguising its didactic intentions and making itself all the more satirical. It's a very smart move, I think, and it's certainly one that, it's the kind of thing that Huang Jianqin used to discuss with Wu Tianming. And certainly the film and the angle of approach had the full support of the studio head when Huang Jianqin made it. It is extraordinary that this was Huang Jianqin's first feature film. I think it's without doubt the most innovative first feature from a fifth generation director, other than Huang Tudi, Yellow Earth. It's very, very rare for a film director to start out in his or her first film determined to do something so radically different from the norms. Chen Kaige did in Yellow Earth, Huang Jianqin did in Black Cannon Incident. It's quite daring, and it's especially heartening to see it carried off with so much success. It's a success that Huang Jianqin was not really able to repeat. He tried to repeat it because Mr. Zhao, the protagonist of the film, became so popular in China for many reasons. He tried to make a sequel, a follow-up, called Swo Wei. It's known as The Stand-In, or as Dislocation in English, featuring the same character played by the same actor. Swo Wei is set in an even more futuristic China, where it's possible to have robots impersonating human beings. So again, he used the same strategy of setting the action sometime in the future, or presenting the future visually at least, while at the same time dealing with problems of the present. But Swo Wei is much less successful, both in its style, visual stylization, and in its plotting, I think, than Black Cannon. It was a bit disappointing, in fact, for many people who'd come to love Mr. Zhao from Black Cannon. Huang Jianqin went through a long, long search to find the right actor to play Mr. Zhao. He rejected many rather well-known film actors for the part, because he didn't think they brought the right quality to it. And he found Liu Zhihong, who plays him, in, I think, a children's theatre company, a theatre company for children, in Shanghai. He had previously only theatre experience. So it was basically Huang Jianqin who brought him into movies. Why did Huang Jianqin have such trouble casting the role? I think it's because he has an almost Kafka-like passivity. Mr. Zhao is a skillful man, but he's what the Japanese would call an otaku. Or in English we call a nerd. He's focused entirely on his work, He's not married. He seems to have no great interests beyond the work. He lives a solitary life. He's happy with his work and with his hobbies, which include, unfortunately, playing chess. Although he does say towards the end of the film that he's going to give up playing chess after the upheavals that his chess game and the missing chess piece has caused. But anyway, he's what the English would call a nerd. I mean, he's somebody who is not terribly interested in his social role. He's not terribly interested in any political role. He's not particularly ambitious for himself. He wants to have a quiet, satisfying life, pursuing his work and leisure interests. And so he is, broadly speaking, ready to passively accept the orders that come down from above. So he might make some gesture of protest. He might say, no, you should let me do this. I'm better at it. But he won't take it to the limit. He won't make a point of principle about it. He won't put up a real fight. He'll just make his opinion known and then back down. I remember when I first went to China, which is not long after Mao's death in the late 70s, end of 78 I think it was, and I was hosted by Zhongying Gongsi, at that time the state monopoly distributor and sales agent and importer of foreign films as well. And they were showing me and a colleague a lot of films. And they took us around as well. And one of the gentlemen whose job it was to look after me because he spoke good English, suddenly turned to me in the car one day and he fished in his bag and pulled out a copy of the script in English for Orson Welles' adaptation of The Trial, a novel by Franz Kafka, which is quite faithful to the novel in certain ways. The gentleman who produced this thing had never seen the film. He'd only read the script, which he jumped upon because it was in English and he'd love to read books in English to practice his English. And he said, I've read this, but I don't understand it. I said, can you explain to me, was he guilty or not guilty? And I said, well, we don't know. Nobody knows. The author didn't know. Franz Kafka didn't know. I think that's not the point of the story or of the film that Orson Welles made from it. The point is, he feels he might be guilty. And the guy said, I understand. We have people like that in China too. Now, I don't think Mr. Zhao is a man who thinks he might be guilty, but he is passive in that respect. He's insecure in himself. If at the time when he's urgently needed to help install new equipment in the company he works for, the company mysteriously decides to send him off someplace else to do some meaningless job in another department and keeps him away from the foreign expert who has come to supervise the installation of the new equipment, he basically does not protest. He does protest briefly, verbally, but he doesn't put up a fight and he just basically goes along with it. In the new place, he keeps hearing rumours that things are going very badly, that the tourist translator they've brought in to replace him is doing a terrible job and there are constant misunderstandings and the German is getting more and more irritated. Why can't I have Mr. Zhao? Mr. Zhao knows what I'm talking about. He's an expert. He's a technical translator. He's not a tourist translator. I need a technical translator. And it comes to a climax about halfway through the film when he asks for some ball bearings, which in German is Kugel. But Kugel is also the word for bullet in German, and the stand-in translator, of course, gets it wrong and orders some bullets, and that's the straw that breaks the camel's back. It's the German, Mr. Schmidt, becomes so irritated that this incompetent translator has got the wrong thing for him. And ironically, at the climax of the film, after the German has gone, it's the ball bearings that have been wrongly installed or wrongly oiled, which cause the equipment to break down very soon after it comes into use. So you have a situation where Mr. Zhao rather passively accepts the fate that the company determines for him and doesn't really put up a fight and doesn't really feel he's able to assert himself or insist that this is stupid or that this is just creating trouble. It's causing the company immense difficulties and it's costing the company money. All of which makes it a particularly ridiculous thing. But the film shows us in particular detail, I mean with very specific detail, through a series of meetings and a series of episodes that advance the plot bit by bit, that Zhao is being sent away and prevented from working on this project for his own protection. The party's position is that this is for his own protection because he's under investigation. The party's policy is to respect intellectuals, and he is an intellectual. He must be respected, so he must be protected from himself while he's under investigation and sent out of harm's way. So nothing bad can happen to him through meeting this mysterious German. This is, of course, founded on the proposition that the German is alien and untrustworthy in some way. And the film shows people unwilling to trust him and irritated by him and unwilling to understand him and certainly never able to see his point of view as a foreigner in China. I was myself a foreigner in China quite often in the 1980s, and I can testify that the film gets it pretty much right, that it was often frustrating, it was often difficult, because bureaucrats especially, and not only party bureaucrats, but all kinds of bureaucrats actually in China, wanted an easy life in the 1980s and were very content to do what they thought you should want and not what you actually did want. So I had a number of confrontations with bureaucrats in the 1980s, and they were not that different in their small scale from what Hans Schmidt goes through in Black Can Incident. He can't understand why he's being denied his proper, competent, established translator who does know technical terms and doesn't make stupid mistakes. And in fact, when Zhao announces that he's been doing calculations of his own and he's found that there's a mistake in the plans, which Mr. Schmidt, of course, angrily denies, but then when he does some calculations of his own, finds that Zhao was right. There was a mistake. He raises the question, why are you buying this old stuff? We have newer equipment which is much more suitable for you. What you're buying here at quite high cost is essentially obsolete equipment. Why didn't you recommend them to buy the new stuff? Oh, but I did, says Mr. Zhao. I precisely recommended them to buy the latest equipment. They didn't listen to me. The decision came from high up. They said, no, we'll have this equipment. Now, in a nutshell, I think that's what the film is getting at. The film is pointing out a fundamental flaw in the way that China modernizes and the way that China deals with the outside world and the way that China deals with its own experts, its own intellectuals and technical experts, all of which are demonstrated in a very graphic way in the plot of this film. But I think the reason it becomes so sympathetic, particularly to the Chinese audience, and this was an unexpectedly successful film in China, given how experimental it is, or how innovative and unusual it is, how different it is from other films of the mid-80s, it's surprising that it sold so many copies and attracted such large audiences. But I think the reason it did is that many audiences around China empathize with Mr. Zhao. Many people feel like Mr. Zhao. They feel we're sort of powerless in the face of orders from above. We basically have to accept what they tell us to do, and there's little we can do about it. It may be frustrating, it may be irritating, we may be well aware that this is actually costing the company or the enterprise or the country big money. They're wasting the money because of ideological questions or policy questions or whatever it is. And I can see, I'm speaking as a character, I can see that, that we could do this better if only we weren't tangled up in these ideological questions, these procedural questions. But somehow the higher-ups don't understand it. They don't follow this. They don't get along with it. So the film is pointing out these problems in, I think, a rather frank way. And it's, of course, challenging to the censors because, the Communist Party in China and the Film Bureau in particular are not very fond of criticism. They don't like to be criticized. It's rather like Donald Trump doesn't like to be criticized. If you criticize him, he fights back. He starts insulting you and belittling you or trying to belittle you. It's the way certain people think. But the film certainly pushes the envelope. The film definitely tries to go as far as it can in its social satire and its political satire. But I think the reason it gets away with it is because Mr. Zhao is so likable, and in his humility and his passivity, his lack of assertiveness in the context in which he's working, many people in China can empathize with him. They feel, yes, I know what that feels like. I know how difficult it is to be a cog in a machine like that, a machine on that scale. I too have said, this could be done better, or why are we buying this when we could be buying a more up-to-date model, or whatever it might be, and being ignored. The higher-ups didn't pay attention to me, they didn't listen to what I was saying. So many people have experienced that kind of frustration and that kind of irritation. And I think that's what made the film so popular. The film is not about religion, but there is a sequence towards the end of the film. After all the problems have been resolved, after the mystery has been exposed and everybody has come to recognize how this stupid mistake occurred, Mr. Zhao is by himself and he stands in the doorway of a church looking into a church service going on. It's a Catholic church by the looks of it. And we've been told at the very beginning of the film that his parents were Catholic. There's no reason to believe that Mr. Zhao himself is a Catholic, or that he's inherited their religion, but clearly it means something to him, or he wouldn't stand in the doorway of this church looking in. I don't think they have a clear-cut meaning in terms of the context of the film. The film is not saying, it's definitely not saying, we should all be more religious, or wouldn't it be good if we all, embraced the Catholic Church? It's definitely not saying those things, but it is observing that this system exists and acknowledging it and in a sense respecting it. Why is it doing that? I think it's because it has been satirically questioning about corporate structures, other ways of organizing society and organizing people's lives, and it has rather graphically shown certain shortcomings in the ways that those systems work. So that little glimpse of the functioning community inside a small church is maybe symbolic in a way, because it stands briefly as a contrast with another way of organizing life. And my guess is that that's why it's there. To be frank, I've never discussed this with Huang Jianqin, and I don't know specifically if it was his intention to do that. And I don't know if this came from Jiang Shenliang's story. I don't know if there's any similar element in the original story, or if it's one of the things that Huang Jianqin added to the script. But anyway, that seems to be how it works in the film. I'd like to tell you a little anecdote about how I first became aware of Black Cow Incident. I was quite a frequent visitor to China by the time the fifth generation appeared. I was going on average at least once a year, sometimes more. And I had friends in many places, including at the Film Academy and at the Film Association. And one particular friend I made, I'm not going to give her or his name. I don't want to compromise anybody, even at this late stage, even though it's 30-some years later. But one particular friend knew of my interest in Chinese cinema and knew of my interest also in the need for innovation in Chinese cinema. Because I visited the Film Academy and seen some student work there, and I expressed a strong interest in the work of some of the what became known as the fifth generation graduates. I'd seen some of their student films. And so this person started sending me material. Didn't happen often, and at that time the person was very, very cautious. They didn't send directly from China. Had somebody carry outside China an envelope and then mail it to me from Hong Kong or some other place. And what the first envelope that arrived like that was, I think, in '84. And it was an envelope that contained some information about a film called Huang Tu Di, which was being made at the time, Yellow Earth. And it contained in the envelope, apart from a couple of pages of information about the film, were a large number of 35mm frames, literally clipped from the film, I mean from the cutting room floor, because the film was in post-production by this time. And these frames were sent to me in an envelope so I could just hold them up to the light and see these very arresting images that Zhang Yimou was creating for Chen Kai-ke. So the first I heard of Huang Tu Di was quite a long time before I saw the film. I didn't see the film until about a year later. The second such envelope that reached me, via a similar circuitous route and from the same sender, it was about黑炮事件. And it also included a large number of 35mm clippings of frames from the film, retrieved from the cutting room, but showing those emblematic compositions, including one with a giant clock and others that seemed illustrated rather clearly the restricted colour palette of the film, so the way that the film was presenting itself in a limited range of colours and eliminating other colours as much as possible. Again, about a year before I saw the finished film, I was alerted to the fact that this film was coming. And it means that there were people in China at that time in quite senior positions of authority who were very much interested in seeing innovative work being done, interested in supporting it, and interested in getting news of it to the outside world. Specifically me in this case. I doubt I was the only person in receiving this kind of material, but anyway, I was. So to me it was very interesting that He Pao Shi Jian was followed Huang Tu Di as from my benefactor in China as an example of great strides being made in Chinese cinema.